Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Swartwood here. Tonight I am joined by the best-selling author of suspense novels, including Burying the Honeysuckle Girls, The Weight of Lies, and her latest, Gothictown. Born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama, she graduated from Auburn University and worked in New York City as an actor, producer, screenwriter, and behind-the-scenes soap opera assistant for As the World Turns and The Guiding Light. That's right, it's your favorite writer and mine, Emily Carpenter. Emily, how the heck are you?
Hi, I'm doing so well. Thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be on your show.
Show? Yeah, I guess it's a show. I don't really know.
Robert Show.
Sometimes people
Yeah,
say,
it's a
sometimes
show.
people want
Come
to call it
on.
a podcast, and I'm like, I don't think it's a podcast either. We're just, but yeah, so thanks for making time. You and I were chatting in the green room. You had been kind enough to blurb my very first Avery Bishop novel, Girl Gone Mad, so I am very, very deeply, appreciative of that. But we're here to talk about obviously your latest book, Gothic Town, that just came out a month or two ago, or how long has it been out so far?
Well, it came out March 25th, so it's
Okay.
it's been a minute, but yeah, I'm still out here, pounding the pavement, selling
Yep.
books.
As you have to constantly be
Yeah.
grinding. So,
Oh,
but
yeah.
before we get to the most recent book, I always want to kind of jump back in time. Burying the Honeysuckle Girls, my understanding is, was your first published novel. Now, was that your first, how do I want to say it? Was that your first novel or your like first novel? You know what I mean? Like how
My
was that?
first attempt? No, it was not. There is a long buried book in a drawer somewhere called The Tango Test that was my first novel that will never see the light of day.
Okay. Well, before we get to that, when did you kind of realize you wanted to be a writer? Because I've found talking to a lot of different writers, it all comes at, different stages in life. Many times it's very, very young, they're scribbling stories out in elementary, middle school. Sometimes it comes really late. Like, when did you start, or do you remember the very first like creative thing you did, whether it be a story, poem, drawing, anything like that?
Yeah, I was a big reader as a kid and I loved writing. I have this written on my website, but my first book that I wrote was a plagiarized version of the Pokey Little Puppy that I wrote. I was probably like 5 years old, and I just copied the book and my mom stapled it together. And I think, when I was 14 and I was very much a horse girl and I loved books about horses. And I can remember trying to write a book about a girl and a horse that never really went anywhere, but I always kind of had those impulses. But I didn't think, I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, and back then, being a writer seemed like something that was not attainable to me. I didn't like there was no internet, there was barely even cable TV. So it just seemed like I didn't know how books got published. And so I didn't even dream of being a writer until when I went to work in New York and worked for the two soaps. I realized this is a really cool job. The writers on those soap operas were like really talented people and they had steady jobs. And so that was kind of the first thing I kind of thought maybe I could do this, right, for a soap. It didn't really work out and it didn't end up being the thing that I pursued, but that kind of got me thinking, okay, I kind of know how this works. And you don't necessarily have to be a person with connections. There is a way, like a method to find an agent and that sort of thing. So,
Well, before let's jump back a little bit. How did you get into the soap opera world? Like
So
even behind the scenes
it
aspect of
was
it.
really kind of so my husband, I got married very young, right out of college. My husband and I moved to New York and he was working on Wall Street. And so I got this job at CBS television and it was in the ad sales department. So I was like the assistant to the director of primetime and late night sales. And so they were selling out, commercials during David Letterman. That was kind of what that was all about, and the primetime shows. And so while I was working there and kind of investigating what that business was all about, I happened to meet the women who worked on the floor below me. That was the casting department and the daytime department. So you had the daytime shows, talk shows, kids shows, game shows, but also the soap operas. And I thought, now that sounds like a lot more fun to me than ad sales. So after a year, I interviewed for a job on the floor below, and I ended up working for the director of daytime programming. And yeah, that was kind of how I got into that job.
Did you, and then what did you like specifically were you doing? Like how long were you there? And can you talk about just like what you were doing behind the scenes?
Yeah, I was there for a couple of years and I was kind of in charge of like a bunch of random things. One of the things I did there in back in those days, they ran a lot of contests in conjunction with the marketing department at CBS. And so you'd have a lot of soap opera viewers, winning contest and they would get like tours of the studio or go out to lunch or dinner with some of the stars. And so I always kind of facilitated those things. But the day to day for me was reading a week's worth of scripts about a month in advance. And then I would summarize that week in about 4 or 5 sentences in a little paragraph for each soap, and send that to the AP. And so that was really my first writing job was writing those little summaries for the week for the AP News. And then AP would run them in all the newspapers across the country. We used to have like the television schedule every day in the paper, and on the side, it would have like the crossword puzzle and your horoscope and your bridge moves. And then it would have on Friday, it would be like a summary of what had happened that week on Guiding Light. So you could catch up in case you had missed the shows during the week. So I wrote those. So it was like,
Oh.
yeah, it was kind of like it really was teaching me about story and structure and like which characters were most important to viewers, which storylines were like the A storylines and which were the B storylines. And I didn't quite realize I was getting an education in all that, but I was, and reading these scripts with like this really particularly Guiding Light, the writers were really, really good at like snappy dialogue, repartee. Yeah, they were very impressive. And so I was like in my 20s, like ingesting all of that and really learning from it. And then, of course, the whole thing about living in New York, you're going to shows. I got to go to a lot of free shows with my casting friends, and yeah, it was
Yeah.
a cool experience.
Yeah, I feel like soap operas often get easily dismissed, but they're just so addictive. I remember growing up as I was staying with my grandmother for like a week or so in like upstate New York, and I think it was like Bold and the Beautiful. She would always have it
Yeah,
on, and
that was
just
a CBS show
really
as
just
well.
kind of like you just get like glued and just get stuck to these. So like, did you? I mean, obviously reading these scripts every day, or like, did you have contact with the writers? Did you ever ask them questions? Like, did you ever get feedback? Like, I mean, like, was there ever like the idea where you wanted to try to like write for that? Because I imagine it's not like, writing for regular TV, obviously, if, like a regular, like say like a show, I want to say Castle, but like, I guess r right now The Rookie is kind of like an ABC show, like one of those that at
Yeah.
least has like a certain set, because isn't like the soap operas just kind of just continue on and on and on, right? Like, I mean, how many episodes usually come out in a year?
I don't know, but I mean, they ran every day of the week. And so
Yeah.
these people were like, and they were big writer teams, and they were, I mean, these people had, they were they had the most stable jobs in Hollywood. They were like living in the suburbs of New Jersey and sending their kids to college and like having real lives. It wasn't glamorous, but they had really good jobs and they were really good at what they did. I unfortunately never got to meet the writers. They were not they didn't come to the CBS building. They worked remote basically. Back even this was in the 90s, but they worked at home and wrote their scripts and turned them in, whatever they telexed them or faxed them or whatever we did back then. But yeah, I never met the writers. But I did read a lot of how they, like when my boss would go and they would break out the whole year ahead. I got to read all those documents, which was very interesting. And I got to read treatments, which really taught me how to write a treatment. And I did at one point write a spec script for Guiding Light for my boss, just to kind of like I was only there 2 years, and I was kind of like, can I write? And she was like, sure. And she was very encouraging and said, yeah, I think you've got some talent and keep working. She said all the right things. I wasn't, of course, ready for an actual writing job, but I think if I had stayed there longer, I definitely would have found a way in.
Do you still have a copy of that spec script that you did?
I don't. I don't even know. I mean, this would have been like 1993.
Yeah, still. Okay,
I would
so all right, so then
have
from that when did you write that? You said that book that you wrote that's never going to see the light of day. Like, how did that come about?
Okay, so between working at the soaps and actually writing and publishing, what I wanted to do, we moved back to Atlanta and we started a family. And I really, I mean, bless my heart, I was in my 20s. I had had a job in New York. And I was like, well, definitely now I can write screenplays. I mean, that's the next step for sure. So I started writing screenplays and kind of taught myself. And I took a few classes and read some books, and I wrote a lot of screenplays and would enter them in contests because there was not really an avenue open to like query agents in that business. And especially I was in Atlanta, but that was kind of the boom of indie film. So the industry was opening up a little bit. So I entered a few contests and placed in a few things, and I got shortlisted on the Sundance Writers Lab. But I never like got anywhere past that. And so because for me, I was also very interested in acting. That had been my background in high school and college. And I loved writing. And this for me was like writing for the movies was like my dream. And then I remember one day I was thinking, I started seeing like t books being adapted into movies, and I was like, I wonder if I could write a book and it could be adapted into a movie, and that's how I could get into the film business. So it was not, I did not have pure motives, although I loved books. I was more intently focused on getting into the movie business. And then once I started writing a book and then another book, I really fell in love with fiction and prose and novel writing. And, all of a sudden I was like, oh, I think this is what I love to do. And it was.
So the first couple, I mean, how many spec scripts had you written before you started before you made that decision to then try your hand at writing a novel?
I think I wrote like eight. in
And what type
all.
of genres? Do you remember like what type of genres those were? Were
I
they all
mean,
the kind of the same genre, or were you kind of playing around
no,
with different genres?
I kind of played around with, I'm trying to think, I wrote like one historical based on a true story, and then I wrote one for a friend. It was kind of with her, but it was kind of her story. It was like a family drama. And most of the things I wrote were kind of small indie film type family drama type. Yeah. So,
And when you
and
were
I
doing
still,
these, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was about to say, I still like when I'm not writing a book and I get an idea, sometimes I'll just write it as a screenplay. Still, I have yet to sell a screenplay, but I will one day. Dang it.
Yeah, I mean, I had heard, I think it was the writer Chuck Wendig had made the suggestion that well, and we're going to get more into like their process, but for some writers who maybe don't like to outline, they can though like write their book as a screenplay first, which is essentially gives them an outline and gives them the entire
Right.
book there that then they can kind of feed off of into the novel, and then they have like a first draft of a screenplay, going with that. So, did you find the transition though from having written like eight scripts to then because obviously it's a very different process in terms of writing a novel. I mean, did you find that was harder, easier, about the same?
Um, it's hard. It's hard. They're both hard in different ways, I think. And I will say, I feel like my strength, I really do feel like there is a real skill at writing a readable, compelling screenplay. And a lot of that is brevity, and a lot of that is like really crackling dialogue. And those are two things that I'm not gifted at. I have to work really hard at dialogue and just like very short, vivid sentences. I am much more the describer, and I'm I I feel like my skills are more suited to novel writing. Um, but I will say that one thing I use, and I still use this, is the book Sid Field screenplay. He just outlines. It's basically the Arist, I don't know how to say it. Aristotle's three-act structure, where you have the turning point in after Act One, sending you into Act Two. You have the midpoint, which is another turning point, sending you into 2B, and then you have another your third turning point, sending you into the third act. And I use that tempo structure for every single book I write. And that's something I brought over from screenplay writing. But yeah, I think I'm a better, novelist than I am a screenplay writer, but I'm still working on it. I still have hopes and dreams.
When you were writing scripts, and I mean, nowadays it's very easy to get your hands on. In fact, even just last night,
Yeah,
I subscribed to this guy's Substack, and he always links to different scripts, and I was just downloading a lot of some were more recent scripts and some were classic scripts just to have them,
yeah,
save the PDFs for like reference if I ever have to come back to them.
right.
Back in the day, it was not that easy to track
It's
down these scripts.
so
Like, how
hard.
were you? I mean, were there certain scripts that you got your hands on that you kind of felt were like helpful to read? Because there is a certain format to doing it, but I feel like you said, I mean, every scriptwriter kind of has their own style, even though there is kind of a standard industry style, but there's still different ways about, I guess, about doing it that you can kind of maybe find, I don't want to say inspiration from.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember again, this has been like the late 90s moving into the early 2000s, and there were some places that you could order screenplays from that was like somewhere. And then there were screenplay like craft books that included some excerpts from other screenplays. And I'm trying to remember if there I don't remember one in particular reading one that hit me a certain way. Um, but I do remember I did get Final Draft was out, the software. I mean, I've had Final Draft since the late 90s.
Wow.
So I just keep updating it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've been a good customer to Final Draft. So that I
So,
mean, that's the structure. That builds makes the structure very easy. It's
right,
like a no-brainer. So you never have to worry that you're getting the structure wrong. It's just the content.
right. So when you're then sitting down to write that very first draft of the first novel that you wrote, and again, what type of genre was that book? You
It
mentioned
was
the title, so something tango?
It was called the Tango Test, and
Tango
I
test,
was
that's right.
a tango dancer at the time, just as a hobby. And so I was very into tango. And anyway, it was kind of they would call it rom-com now. Back then, they called it chick lit. And yeah, so it was chick lit. I was very inspired by like Bridget Jones
Mm,
and um, all those books that were kind of coming out around the time. So it was part of that was when I did pitch it to agents, they were like, by that time, Chicklet was done and it wasn't romance and it wasn't quite women's fic. They didn't know what to do with it. And frankly, it wasn't the best book. And it wasn't the genre that I think I would have been happy in long
yeah.
term. So I feel like it's a blessing that it didn't get picked up. I just
So
had to write
did
another
Right, absolutely. So did you remember like how long did it take you to do that initial first draft? And
book.
are you somebody who like outlines it
Robert,
out? Or are you somebody who sits
no,
down and just
Robert.
writes?
The first book I wrote, like I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote, and all of a sudden one day I looked at it and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I forgot books are supposed to be divided into chapters." I had just written like,
Well, you were coming from screenwriting. I mean, there's not
no,
chapters
I did.
really in
It
scripts.
was it was so I totally did it by feel and by instinct. And I just wrote the story, but then I was like, oh God, this needs to be chapters. And so then yeah, it took me forever. And I don't even remember how long, but I labored over that book for years, for, couple years. And then I sent that book out to 162 agents. And 162 agents told me no, thank you. So, yeah,
I'm
it
impressed that
was tough.
162 agents actually got back to you, especially
Well,
nowadays,
a
because I
lot
feel
of
like a lot
them,
of them do not.
well, no, a lot of them said no, thank you without any words.
Right, right, right.
Yeah.
So, all right, so that was the first one. And then was like what came after was Burying the Honeysuckle Girl was so that was the second book you started working on then.
Yeah, that was when
And
like
then
I
that's
had
when you realized that, starting out you needed chapters. So was it a little bit easier then?
Well, I had come a long way. I'd learned a lot about chapters. I had also learned a lot about understanding exactly what genre your book was before you started writing.
Right.
And I was doing some reading and I had just read Flynn's Sharp Objects.
Mm.
This was before Gone Girl came out. I read Sharp Objects and I was like, oh, this is like, I could never measure up to the level of her skill, but this is what I want to write. This kind of dark, and I didn't even know what to call it. What I was thinking of was like Gothic. I was thinking of like Southern Gothic and Gothic, but I didn't know what to call it. But I was like, that is what I want to do because that's what I like to read and that's what I like to watch on TV. And that's what I always gravitate toward that. So that helped me a lot, like pinpoint what I was going for.
Yeah. Well,
And
besides
then,
Sharp Objects, were there other books or authors that you were reading at that time that was inspiring you to really head towards that type of genre?
Not at that time. Hers stood out so much to me because it was so unique to the other stuff. Like I said, like in the late 90s, early 2000s, I was reading whatever the market told me to read, whatever the bestseller list told
Yeah,
me to read.
yeah.
It was like whatever my book club told me to read. I was like reading all the most popular books. And I think Sharp Objects was the first one that I picked up that appealed to me. And I picked it up because I had read her movie reviews. She was like a movie reviewer before.
Yeah, I forget what magazine it was for. Was it Entertainment? No, it wasn't Entertainment Weekly. Maybe it
It might have
was.
been
I think it
Entertainment
was.
Weekly.
Yeah.
But I remember reading her movie reviews and really liking her. And so I picked her book up. And but yeah, it very much harkened back to, what I loved reading as a kid, Nancy Drew and Agatha Christie and like I read some Lois Duncan as like a younger teen and like just some books that I remembered stuck out in my mind. They all had that kind of spooky, dread inducing element. And so I'm like putting the pieces together and I'm like, okay, that's my genre. That's what I'm gonna try to do.
So, do you remember like what specifically inspired the Burying the
Yeah.
Honeysuckle Girls? Like was it a certain character? Was it a certain just like plot point? I mean, like what kind of really got you into that novel?
It was very much a plot. I mean, I tell this story to a lot of groups I talk to, but I was in the bathtub one night and I was thinking very deliberately, okay, the next book I'm going to write is going to be the thing that I like to read and watch movies and watch TV about. And it's going to be some kind of crime, mystery, suspense, thriller. I didn't know exactly what it was called at that point, but it's going to be very atmospheric. It's going to be very southern, and it's going to be a mystery. And it's going to be a little dark, in tone. And I thought, so what is it going to be about? And I'm thinking and thinking, and I get this great idea I start thinking about birthdays that we all have that are like these milestone birthdays, like 20, 30, 40, 50. And I think like, what if there's a woman who is about to turn 30 and she's nervous for like a real reason because she finds out, let's say her mother, grandmother, and great grandmother all died or disappeared on their 30th birthdays. So it's like this family curse, maybe. And so I got really excited and I jump out the bathtub, wrap myself in a towel, I run in the bedroom. My husband's laying there in bed and I like pitch him the story and he's like, "Oh my gosh, that's great. You need to write that." And he's like, "What happened to them on their 30th birthdays?" And I'm like, "I don't know. I'll figure it out." But I mean, that is very indicative of the way I come into a story. I've always come in with a hook. And then I have to figure out the setting and the characters and all that.
Yeah. So how long did that then take you from like when you had that initial, you're in the bathtub to when you basically finished and the manuscript was ready to go and then you started pitching agents?
It was probably about a year and a half. I probably pitched agents too early on it. Got that, jumped the gun a little bit. But it was probably about a year and year and a half. And in Atlanta, we have this great conference called the Atlanta Writers Conference where twice a year they have this amazing roster of like agents and editors come and you can get critiques from them or you can sit down and pitch them. And so yeah, that's how I ended up finding my first agent was there. I pitched Burying the Honeysuckle Girls to her and she
Now,
took it.
was that the title from the very beginning?
No.
Okay,
We
because it
had
is a great title. It's a very unique title. It's, it
it
definitely
is.
sticks in your head.
Yeah, it took a long time to get to that title. And yeah, a lot of heads were thinking on that title. But yeah, no, it wasn't called that. I can't even remember. I think it was called something like Tremble or something because the main character has this tremor in her hand. But yeah, that's I was very happy. I actually did not think of that title. I think it was somebody in my agent's office who came up with that. Yeah.
Okay, so by the time, so that wasn't, if, for people who aren't aware, oftentimes, titles can go through a lot of different stages. It wasn't an instance where basically you shopped it around as that title. It wasn't that you sold it under the whatever title and then the publisher's like, okay, we're going to need, a different title to publish it. So that's the one that you had when you were shopping it
Yeah,
around.
I think I'm trying to remember. I No, I think we sold it with the old title. And we did not come up with the new title until it was like I was in edits with Lake Union.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then did you have a was it just a one book deal or a two book deal?
It I'm tr- it's so I think it was a one book deal. I think it was a one book deal,
Okay.
if I'm remembering correctly. And then my second deal was a two book deal with them.
So at that point, though, I mean, you basically had the publisher. Did you feel a different type of pressure where all of a sudden it was like, okay, now my next book, you know what I mean? Like, oftentimes I kind of feel like sometimes writers spend a lot of times on their first published novel because they have a lot of time to do that. And then once they start to get into actual publishing, there are time restraints, there's deadlines where all of a sudden it's like, okay, well, we need your next manuscript in like, so many months. Like, did you
Yeah,
feel
and
all of a
it's like
sudden where all of a sudden it was like, oh my God.
no, no, and I mean I feel really fortunate in that area because like by the time I had worked on Honeysuckle Girls for so long and I had already started to write another book.
Okay, good.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, and so by the time they Honeysuckle Girls came out, I had another book ready to go. Like so I have that I have a lot of ideas constantly. I am plagued by ideas. They're not all good, but I mean they just don't stop. And it's kind of and I don't tend to get, I can move real easily from one book to another. I don't get like super hung up on like this one book has got to like be the book. If I'll put everything I have into one and then at some time it's time to move on. And I guess I want like the new shiny object, and so I always have so many ideas that I get really excited about. It's not that hard to move on. I also write really quickly. So, I
So what's your
mean,
definition of, I mean, in terms of like when you're working on a new book, are you trying to write every day? And if so, do you usually try to write a certain amount every day?
yeah, when I'm drafting a new book, I try to write every day just for momentum's sake. And I write at least 2,000 words a day. That's like
Oh,
the minimum.
okay.
Yeah.
So, and is it very much like a Nora Roberts vomit draft where you're just trying to get the manuscript out as soon as possible, or are you like, you write 2,000 words a day and then tomorrow you kind of go back through those 2,000 words and do a little editing, or you just kind of go, 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 go?
I go, 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 go. I keep moving forward. It's like shark, like keep moving, get it out, get it all out. And sometimes like I'll think of something and I have to go back and put it in, but I don't go back and like review and clean it up and edit. I don't do that unless it's something like
Right.
massive and
Yeah.
you know, it makes the story hang together. But yeah, I mean, the goal for me is to get it out of me. And um and to get it out of me when I'm in this kind of I get in this kind of like weird sort of high when I'm excited about a story. And it's really, I mean, it's the most fun I think I've ever had in my life when I'm in that story high and I'm in the world and just in a sensing way, like I'm in the setting. I can hear it and taste it and see it, and the characters are, you know, alive to me. And the more I go and the more I write every day, it gets sharper and more intense. And I love that. It is like a lot like a high, and it's really fun for me. And then, it's over and it's just like, oh my God,
Yeah.
that was really fun. And now I've got to fix whatever kind of like hellscape I left behind me.
So, with these types of books, obviously, typically there's, twists and turns and there's like reveals. Do you oftentimes know when you're starting a book how, like, what the twist is going to be, how the end, what the ending is going to be, or is it one of those things you just kind of know you're going to figure it out once you get there?
No, I pretty much know because that's part of my like I get a hook or an idea, but that doesn't mean it can actually be a book. I mean, you know that. Sometimes you can just have an idea that sounds cool that doesn't quite like it's not substantial enough to make a book of it. And then
So,
maybe
like
it's a
short
short.
stories, have you ever done any short stories?
I love short stories. I used to write a lot of flash fiction, and yeah, if I find something that I feel like doesn't quite have the legs for a novel, I love to write it as a short story. But yeah, I forget your question. Oh yeah,
I think it was just,
I do
yeah,
have
like
an
knowing the ending and the twists.
well, I know. Okay, I always know the midpoint. I always want the midpoint to be either a big, I like to call it a reveal, or something kind of unexpected. So I guess that's a twist. And yeah, I in general know the ending. But I also like to discover and hope that there are going to be a lot more twists and turns as I get to that place. So I try to leave space, for inspiration.
Are there ever times where you get to a certain place, like or you've turned in the novel, and just for full transparency, we mentioned you had been kind enough to blurb my Avery Bishop Girl Gone Mad. When I turned in the second novel, I had to do a very heavy rewrite of like the third act. You know what I mean?
Oh
Like there was a time like have you ever had that where you're like, okay, this book is ready to go, and then your editor is like, no, it's not.
I'm trying to think. I'm like going through each. I have, I don't think, I don't think I've ever had to do a heavy rewrite after my first book. I think that first book, Honeysuckle Girls, it was I was really just feeling my way through that book and trying to figure out what it was about and what the secret was and I think after that experience I realized that I needed to have a very firm grasp on those kind of tentpole moments and the motivations. And so thankfully, I've never really had to do a major rewrite. I'm just kind of like mentally thinking through not that I haven't been edited. I definitely have, but that's yeah, that's tough to have to like rework a whole third act. It's a challenge.
Yeah.
Um Yeah, no, that has not happened so far, knock wood.
And then when you're getting into when you look at like the novels, do you have an idea off the bat of how you want to tell it? Like if you want to tell it in first person, I'm trying to think. Like I think
Oh
Gothic
yeah.
Town is first person, right? But there's
Yeah.
different aspects that are maybe third. Like I mean,
Yeah.
or like when you're jumping around in time. Like I think I mentioned to you that like right now I'm listening to Every Single Secret, where it's like you have kind of these kind of like present tense chapters versus and then you kind of like jump back to past tense.
Yeah. That's I'm very fascinated by how other authors do that. And I remember writing Every Single Secret, and I realized I was going to have these, most of that story is like stuck in this one house, and it's very claustrophobic. And when I was writing it, I was also feeling very creatively claustrophobic. Like, I don't like, how many times can they run around the rooms in this house or on the property? And then I realized, oh, that's when I'm gonna flashback and I'm gonna tell this past story of Daphne's life. And I had just read um Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer and realized, God, what a good writer he is. But I realized that he had done that. He had, they're in whatever area X or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
And they flash back to the main character's home life and, what's going on there. And so I went back and read that book again just to kind of see how he did it. Because I thought it was just genius and like it flowed really beautifully and you didn't feel like it didn't feel jarring. So, but yeah, every book is feels like frustrating to me because every book I feel like I never, it's never just presented to me like this is your way into the book. That's always the hardest thing for me is like I do tend to write in first person. I always have. I always feel that works for a female-driven suspense novel for reasons that are obvious and maybe not so obvious. I think women can get in their heads and they can sometimes, because our culture has not trusted them and viewed them as equal citizens, they can tend to mistrust their own perception of events. And so I think suspense novels are a lot of times about a woman who is learning to trust her perception of what's going on around her and take control of that. And so I think first person lends itself to that. But like all, whether I tell it's it's always very overwhelming to me to try to figure out how to do that. And I don't know that I mean, I'm starting a book right now and I'm like, I have these kind of three main characters. Do I tell the story from all three characters? That feels dangerous to me because, like, what if people don't connect with one of the main point of view characters? I don't know. It's that's the scariest part of writing a book to me is trying to figure out whose point of view are we in first person, third person? Are we flashing back? That's really, and it feels like such a momentous decision because if you make that decision and you make the wrong decision, you write the whole book and then you're like stuck.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well,
that
let's talk
part
about
I think gives me fits.
well, let's talk about Gothic Town. You have a copy there over your right shoulder. This just you said came out back in March, so this is your most recent novel. What can you tell everyone about Gothic Town?
So, Gothictown is about a Manhattan restaurateur named Billy Hope. This is post-pandemic. She has shut down her very popular cafe, in New York during the pandemic. And she's kind of, right now, she's like stuck in her tiny apartment with her husband and her small daughter. She's kind of climbing the walls, trying to figure out what to do with her life. And she gets this email from the mayor of a town called Juliana, Georgia, and they are soliciting new residents to come move to their town and kind of boost the economy of Juliana. Um, and so she and her husband, Peter, and her daughter, Mare, they decide to move down to this town. And Billy's going to open a new restaurant. She's going to start over. She's kind of going to get back that person that she was before she shut down her restaurant. And at first, everything is kind of ideal, and the town is kind of like everything she dreamed of. And then she slowly starts to notice some strange things about the people and the town itself. And the town starts to have a strange effect on her husband and her cat, and her daughter. And yeah, so then, and we go downhill from there.
And so was this one then too, where I mean, what was the specific inspiration? Was it the character? Was there a certain thing where you were like, okay, this is, this is what I want to work on next? Because I mean, oftentimes, well, I mean, like you said, you're a fast writer, which is good because, for sometimes it's, it takes people like 2 or 3 years to write a book. So I mean, it kind of benefits you being a fast writer so that, you can kind of just dive into whatever if you have so many different ideas. But I mean, for lots of times you know, people are kind of stuck with, I don't want to say stuck, but like, they're working on a book for about a year or two. So like
Yeah.
it's a commitment. So I mean, yeah, was there any type of thing that really kind of made you decide, okay, like this is the next project I want to do?
Yeah, I think, yeah, for me, like I said, it's always that hook. When I get really excited about a hook and I think, oh, this is like, I mean, not to be too business minded about it or cynical, but like I can see the cover. I can see how this the log line, how you can sell this in an elevator pitch. And that never hurts to be able to hand an editor a book that's like, here's all your marketing copy, that I've already written for you. And so all of that kind of um, I read this article in New York Magazine about a tiny town in Italy that was in danger of becoming a ghost town. They just had a handful of residents who lived there, and they were all elderly. And so they were the first town that were giving away villas for €1. But you had to commit to like $30,000 worth of renovation, and you had to commit to living there for a decade. And I was like, oh, that's like a deal with the devil a little bit. Like, what if it's terrible? And I thought, my second thought was like, of course, this town is full of Italian vampires looking for new blood. Duh. Um, so that's my brain. And I'm thinking like, this is like a book on a silver platter to me. I just don't write about Italy. But I knew immediately that I could like pivot that into a very Southern Gothic story about a town in Georgia. And so, yeah, it was the hook. And that was it. I was ready to go. And then it took me a while to flesh out the rest of it.
Yeah.
Um, but
So going back, you said like, typically when you're really cooking, you're doing at least like 2,000 words a day to get that at least that first draft. How many drafts do you find and I'm sure this probably changes book by book, but do you find that like how many drafts does it really take to get to a place where it's ready to, go to your agent, to go to an editor, to be shopped around?
I like to think it's like 4 or 5, but it's really like 8 or 9. Because I'm impatient and I'm always like, it's ready to go before it's really, really ready to go. But yeah, roundabout. 4, I'm like, okay, this is in pretty good shape. But then, it's not. It always needs more. So,
Yeah.
um, and I would say like I do a lot of drafts. I feel like the main structure of the story is there, but there's always like a ton of plot holes, right? And like murky kind of motivation, and there's always like something missing that I can't quite put my finger on that just doesn't come until I've done those 6, 7, 8 drafts. And then you go, oh, there it is, and a lot of times all the elements are in place for you to put that one thing in that was missing. It's like your subconscious knows it. You can't, there's no shortcuts. You just got to do each draft and you got to like be patient with it and just let it take its time.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there anything so Gothictown just came out. You said you're working on another book. Is that something that's contracted? Can people expect something
No,
new or
no,
no?
not at all. And my agent is always like, you don't have to write the whole book because like once if you're out of contract, the only thing you have to do um is a pitch,
Yeah.
with like say whatever your first 3 chapters. Um unless you've been dropped by a publisher, which I've experienced, and then you have to write a whole book if you're starting from scratch. But yeah, she's like, you don't have to write the whole book. And I'm like, it's fine. I'm having fun. I'm doing it anyway. And so I will say that the book coming out next year, we're in copy edits on.
Okay.
I'm about to pitch another book that, after I'm out of contract. So, but like I've already written that whole book because I just cannot listen to advice. I cannot help
No, I mean it's
myself.
better being ahead of the game, absolutely.
Yeah.
And obviously in the news, I think it was in Deadline, Gothic Town has been optioned. So I mean, is that
Yeah.
still very early stages, or is there anything you can like any additional news you can share about that, or it's one of those things that
Yeah.
as of right now it's just kind of quote unquote in development.
In development. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's in development, but we do have a showrunner and executive producer, Abby Ajayi, who is amazing, who worked on How to Get Away with Murder and Inventing Anna. But yeah, it's all in development right now. So
yeah, no, that's really
I
cool.
haven't seen a script yet, but I'm excited about hopefully it moving forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right. So the latest book is Gothic Town. You have one in copy edits right now. It'll be out next year. They
Yeah,
haven't announced the title yet. Like, you can't give us a sneak peek on that, or is there like
I can tell you.
maybe like an elevator pitch just to say like, okay, this is what this kind of book's about?
Yeah, so I don't have a cover on it yet, but the title is A Spell for Saints and Sinners. And it is about a young woman who in Savannah, Georgia, who has inherited her grandmother's psychic business and as well as her townhouse in Savannah. And she's really struggling financially to keep up with this old house and to pay her bills and her taxes. And she happens to have an appointment, a bachelorette party comes in to her psychic business to have her read their palms and read their auras. And she does a reading for the bride to be that is very spot on. It turns out this young woman, the bride to be, is the daughter of the wealthiest family in town, who they are full of secrets of their own and a lot of dark secrets. And they have a connection to my main character's grandmother who has passed away. And so, as she is pulled into their life and into kind of their tangled web, she has to kind of figure out her own boundaries between light and darkness and using her psychic witchy abilities or not, and how far to go with that.
Very, very cool. And then, so just one last time, if you want to have Gothictown, make sure everyone can see the cover. This obviously is out in bookstores now. And where can people find you online if they want to stalk you?
So stalk me on Facebook. I'm Emily Carpenter. Get me on Instagram. I'm emily.d.c. And sometimes I'm on Threads. Threads is a little scary at the moment. Everybody's very scoldy on Threads. So
I've
I don't
heard
know.
that. Yeah, I never signed up
Yeah.
for it. It was
Yeah.
at a time I felt like there was a new social media platform popping up every week, and finally I was like, you know
Yeah.
what? I'm going to do at least one a month. And so I never got into Threads. But yeah, I
Yeah.
hear not so great things.
It's a that's all I'll say. It's a little scoldy. And I'm so old. I'm like Gen X. I'm like, I probably would get in trouble for everything I say. So, no, I'm mostly on Instagram. That's kind of where I hang out, post pictures of my dogs and
And then, do you have any more? Because I know that you were having a lot of events. Do you have any more events coming up for Gothic Town?
yeah, actually I'm actually doing an event on June 11th on Wednesday in my area in Milton, Georgia at Poe and Company Bookstore. I'm doing that with Kimberly Bell, who wrote The Expat Affair, which is about to drop any minute now, and Edgar Award
That's
winning
right. She just won the Edgar Award.
did, well deserved. Um, yeah, so come on out. They can go on poeandcompanybookstore.com to get a ticket for that.
All right, very good. And then, is there anything that like you've been recently reading, watching, listening to that you have really enjoyed, want to recommend?
Oh gosh. Well, I recently was in bed with pneumonia. So I feel like I watched every single thing there was and but can't remember any of it now that you've asked. Listen, I'll just pitch Kim Bell's new book, The Expat Affair. I read it last week. It's really fantastic. It's about like people in Amsterdam stealing diamonds and acting badly. And yeah, it's great. It's a lot of fun.
All right. That sounds good. So, okay. So again, the new book is Gothic Town. Emily, thank you so much for hanging out. Oh, there it is. And yeah,
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate this was fun.
absolutely. So, and thanks again for everybody for checking it out. So, we'll see you next time.